I have the start of a small MVC application open in Visual Studio. We'll be building on this a bit more throughout the course, but right now it's pretty close to the default starter template. For this demo, we want to look inside of the global.asax file at the bottom of our project. This application was built off of an MVC5 template, so inside of the application start, we're calling 4 other static methods. Now, before we discuss this code, let's just prove what we discussed earlier and show that application start fires as soon as the application begins. I'm also going to paste in a method at the bottom, and that's called application end. There's just a simple line of code in here just so that we can put a breakpoint on it and see that it gets hit when the application ends. So let's run the application and we should hit our breakpoint. We can just continue on with that and our home page will load. Now, to stop the site and trigger our end lifecycle event, we can just kill the application from our system tray at the bottom here. You can see how this triggers the application end event. So I'll just hit continue and end the application. So that's simple enough, but let's take another look inside this application start method. Right now we just care about the third item, which is our route config class. This class has a method called register routes. If you're using an earlier version of MVC, your register routes method might be right inside of your application class here. But the important thing to note is that we're passing in the static routetable.routes property to this method. Let's drill down inside this method and see what we find. If you've worked with custom routes in MVC, you're probably familiar with this method, but let's look at it in the context of everything that we've been discussing. The route collection that was passed in from our route table can be seen as a parameter at the top here. Next, we're calling the map route method. So what this does is assign routes to the route table collection that will be examined by the URL routing module. So here we've defined only one route, and it'll be the routing module's job to compare any incoming URLs to see if they match. Since we're doing this during startup, those routes will be readily available. Now, an important question we should ask is, after the routing module matches a request to a route, how does it know what to do next? This route is just a set of strings and anonymous objects. How does this get forwarded onto a controller? Well, if you remember from the previous module, we discussed that every route needs an associated route handler class to go with it. Now, the route handler class really only has one purpose: to retrieve the right HTTP handler for our request. The HTTP handler is what will actually execute to generate a response for that original request. So where does this route handler come from? I don't see any mention of a route handler in this method. Well, if we use IntelliSense to take a closer look at this map route method, we can see that it's actually an extension method. I think this is one of the reasons some people who are new to MVC and routing are not familiar with route handlers. The framework sort of disguises it by default. This method really just provides a shorthand way of assigning MVC routes to the route collection. It automatically associates the MVC route handler to this route for us. In fact, we can see this for ourselves if we look in the MVC source code. Over in my browser, I have the MVC open source project open on Codeplex. So if we poke around in here, we can see the code for this extension method. Now remember, MVC is open source, so if you want to know how something works, sometimes it's easiest to just go read it yourself. Some of the code can be a bit daunting at first, but the more you read it, the more comfortable you'll get with it. We'll be revisiting this site a bit as we go along. So inside the system.web.mvc namespace, we have this route collection extensions class. And here towards the bottom, we can see the code for map route. Behind the scenes, MVC is really just creating a new route and a new MVC handler and adding them to the route collection. You could do all this yourself. In fact, let's go ahead and do something similar in our project. So back inside our solution, I'll just comment this default code out, and we can replace it with a few lines of our own. This code isn't quite identical, but it's close enough for now. So we're just manually assigning the MVC route handler and the URL pattern to match. After we create the route, we can just give it a name and add it to the route collection ourselves. So let's run our project and see if this is all still working as expected. So no surprises here, everything is still working. And in a later module, we'll look closer at the MVC route handler to see specifically what happens when it executes and what code is contained inside of it.